This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 308 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. Before getting into this week's questions, I wanted to let you guys know that we've got another free play for FanDuel Podcast Network listeners this week. Just head to FanDuel.com/league/NumberFire, make a lineup, and enter for a chance to win free NumberFire Premium as well as a little bit of cash. That's FanDuel.com/league/NumberFire for your chance to win. Okay, so this first question's from @FantasyBulldog. Can you disregard positive touchdown regression with Leonard Fournette at this point? Their offensive line gets blown up on the majority of short yardage plays inside the 5. He doesn't have the speed to take it to the house on a big play. Do his specific circumstances make him a statistical outlier? So let me tell you a little story about this guy who goes by the name Julio. He's a wide receiver in the NFL. It was week 9 of the 2018 season, and Julio hadn't scored a touchdown. And he had 81 targets and 812 yards on the season. Fantasy Twitter was saying the exact same things, that this Julio character just couldn't score touchdowns, that he was bad at scoring touchdowns. Well, Julio went on to score 8 touchdowns last year, silencing the haters. Now look, Leonard Fournette is struggling to find the end zone. I'm with you there. But let's not get carried away with this narrative. Leonard Fournette has a grand total of 4 goal line rushes this year. To say that the offensive line gets blown up on the majority of short yardage plays inside the 5, while that may be true, it's also true on a very, very limited sample size. If you want to say that you don't believe in Jacksonville's offense, and you don't believe he's going to get a ton of goal line reps, and as a result, you don't think he's going to regress to what we'd expect him to regress to, sure, that's a totally fair take. But to assume he's only going to score 2 total rushing touchdowns this year, I think that's flawed process. Because even though he hasn't seen a lot of goal line work, he's still accumulating a ton of yards. He's still second in the NFL in red zone rushes. And he's still third in the NFL with 17 carries within the 10. Even that number alone is an outlier. Since 2011, we've seen a little over 100 seasons where a running back had 15 or more carries within the 10-yard line. Among those running backs, every single one of them scored at least 1 touchdown. And all of them with 17 or more rushes from within the 10 had at least 2 of them. That's more than Leonard Fournette. Fournette's lack of scoring is an outlier, and we should expect him to start scoring at a normal rate moving forward. That's how this stuff works. This next question is from @Pel316. What are your thoughts on JuJu rest of season? Good game versus Miami, so tempted to sell high, but trading wide receiver for wide receiver in my league is hard, and running back isn't really a position of need for me. Should I sit it out with him and expect wide receiver 2 numbers rest of season, or make a deal? So I'm going to go on record and say that I can't stand same position for same position deals. They sometimes make sense, but there's also a loser in those deals. You're not usually making both teams better. That's the goal of trading. So I don't think that I would go with that approach. I also want people to start thinking outside the box more when they're trading. You don't always have to think of trades from a one-for-one perspective. It doesn't have to just be JuJu for a wide receiver or JuJu for a running back. Package JuJu up with one of your running backs and upgrade the running back position. Find teams in your league that really need help at multiple positions, give them that depth, and benefit from a stronger starting roster. Now on to JuJu specifically. I think now's not a bad time to sell. He's a great player who can do great things, but the offense is still pretty limited, and they're likely going to try to be run heavy. He's got a 21% target share this year, but he's averaging just 6.6 targets per game. And that's because since Ben Roethlisberger's injury, so if we look at from week 3 onward, the Steelers have had a 1.07 pass to rush attempt ratio. They've been a really run heavy team. That number's 1.38 when you include those games with Ben. I think he can be a lower end wide receiver too from here on out. But I also don't trust that he's going to give you the consistency that you want. This next question says, how can we adjust value from a player in a local 10-team league? I.e., I've been trying to trade for a top 10 RB1, offering 2 top 10 wide receivers, but getting declined every time. Amari Cooper and Tyler Lockett, or Tyreek Hill, for Zeke being the latest, which I think is acceptable. Love the show, by the way. So this sort of goes back to what I just talked about a little bit with trading. But I would just make sure that you're giving the opposing team what they actually need. I'm not saying that you're not doing this. But if the team with Zeke has no RB2 and a lot of great wide receivers, that explains why that manager wouldn't want to make a deal like this. But I also think getting elite running backs in fantasy football is always going to be a really difficult thing to do. Teams just aren't going to be willing to part with Zeke or Dalvin Cook or Christian McCaffrey. They're incredibly valuable assets. But just make sure that you're looking at opposing team need and honestly explain that process to the person that you're selling to. Explain why and how it's making both teams better. This next question is from @PardonMyFrench. First, you already know this, but I love the show. Thanks. Second, when do you officially start to think a player is a bust? For example, OBJ this year. How many more weeks until you think he's a major bust? So I'll be honest with you, I never think of anyone as a bust because it doesn't really do us any good actually labeling someone as a bust. Like, let's just say that today on this show, I declare that Odell Beckham is a bust. What does that do for you and your fantasy team? Do you make your decisions in a different way? You're still valuing OBJ the exact same way. He's still a talented wide receiver who's seeing a good target share in an offense that's truthfully had a lot of bad passing touchdown luck. So to be honest, I generally don't get concerned over the subjective things that don't really impact my fantasy lineup and how I make decisions. I look at the individual player's game and his peripheral numbers to see whether or not I really want that player on my team or if I want to trade him away. In OBJ's case, I still think he should be in my lineup, but I'm always open to trading anyone. This next question is from @Grant00790857. How do we handle the Gordon-Eckler platoon? Is there ever an Eckler game or a Gordon game? Thanks. So running back is honestly bad enough that we're going to see both of these players as relevant running backs in PPR formats each and every week. Like, they can both be top 20 guys. I'd probably say that Eckler has more upside from a snap share perspective in negative game scripts, like they could be in this weekend. So I'd prefer Eckler to Gordon in PPR formats this weekend. But Gordon is still a fine play because it's not like he won't see the field, and he's clearly the team's goal line back. I don't see RB1 upside with either player without an injury, though. But both are usable enough each week to where they can be in your RB2 spot in PPR formats. This next question is from @Mike_NYY. Can Darius Geis be a league winner? I think league winner is too strong of a description for Darius Geis, but I do think he has a chance to be usable, yeah. Washington's offense isn't good no matter who's under center. And we know situation matters a lot for running backs. So far this year, only 3 teams have scored fewer running back points than Washington has. Geis does have a chance to be a workhorse, though. Adrian Peterson has consistently been seeing over 80% of the team's running back carries, but he's not hitting a 10% target share. Geis has that kind of opportunity. So yeah, I think that he could be an RB2 this year. And I could be wrong about this, but seeing an RB1 ceiling in this offense, that seems kind of foolish. This next question is from @Burnsall. Lions backfield a giant mess and avoid? If you're talking about DFS, yeah, I would likely avoid the Lions backfield. But I do still think that Ty Johnson is fine to roster still if you're taking a flyer. Now, I talked about Trey Carson a bit on this week's 15 Transaction Show, and he's still worth an ad. But Ty Johnson had the more complete usage profile last week with 30% of the team's running back carries and a 13% target share, and he played the most snaps. He has the most upside. Things can change a lot week to week, so I'd still hold on to both of those running backs, especially Ty Johnson, just to see if one of those guys emerges. Especially now that the trade deadline is over and the Lions didn't trade for a running back. This next question is from @FFreak42069. Does Jalen Samuels hold standalone value when James Conner comes back? It was looking like that could be the case before Samuels got hurt. I'd say it depends on the depth of your league, but there's definitely that possibility. Before his injury, he played a game against Cincinnati where he was being deployed all over the field. And he saw 45% of the Steelers' running back rushes and a stupid high 27% target share. But he's the right player that you'd want on your roster this time of year. He's a handcuff, but he could also help you in really desperate situations. And don't forget, James Conner's basically been hurt in what seems like every single game this year. The Steelers would be smart to make that backfield more of a committee moving forward. They just didn't have much of a choice last week. This next question says, given the nightmare that tight end has been this year, is it finally time to draft one of the consensus top 3 guys next year? Or just ignore the small marginal difference for that one position? Yeah, I mean, honestly, I have no idea how you would look at this season and say that getting a consensus top 3 tight end was a good idea. Travis Kelce, who was often selected in the first round, is the tight end 4 in points per game. Zach Ertz is the tight end 8. George Kittle, and this is being recorded before Thursday night's game, but Kittle is just ahead of Ertz. The thing with tight end, and this is the same with quarterback, but with tight end, you're only starting one of them. So the demand for that position is a lot lower. During your draft, the spread of tight ends and quarterbacks is large, meaning you can get the tight end 10 or the quarterback 10 very often in the double-digit rounds, while the RB 10 and the wide receiver 10 go in round 2. That changes the opportunity cost equation dramatically. Because when you get Travis Kelce early, you're not just foregoing the chance for an elite running back and a wide receiver, you're ignoring the fact that you can get usable tight ends late. I did a show this offseason with my friend Rich Rebar on this very topic, and we talked about fading the top 3 tight ends on that show. It's an episode from July if you want to listen to it. And that's something that I'll feel confident doing year in and year out, given the structure of fantasy football. This next question is from @JCBurner1. Does the hashtag process change much, if at all, when trying to climb back from a bad record into a playoff spot? Yeah, I think that you just have to probably embrace variance a little bit more. We know that the outlook for certain players is narrow, and then the outlook for other players can be wide. If you're losing, then you're a little more desperate. And if you're more desperate, then you need to look at players who have a wider range of outcomes, because the person who has that player may be looking for the opposite. So yes, I'd say that my process does change, and I embrace the more volatile players a little bit more. This last question is from @FantasyWireHQ. It's a little bit more of a personal one. What is your next favorite hobby after fantasy football? Yeah, so I obviously love fantasy football, and I've made a career out of it. It's one of my favorite things to analyze and work on and do. But I also like playing video games during the off season. Like everyone else, I love to binge watch TV shows. My wife and I love checking out breweries and hanging out with friends. I mean, I do all the typical stuff. And now that I'm a dad, my favorite hobby is honestly just spending time with my daughter. I know that's kind of a lame answer, but it's a true answer. You know this, dads. When you've got kids, your life revolves around them in the best way possible. So I guess I don't have a traditional answer like, I build tables in my garage. That's actually what my wife does as a hobby. I used to be really into web and graphic design though, but that's sort of just gone away with my focus on my job and fantasy football. It's kind of nice to just focus on my job, my family, and the typical things that we all do, like drinking good beer and watching Netflix. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. And also, if you could leave me a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, it would be greatly, greatly appreciated. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your weekend, and best of luck in Week 9.